I'm your host. My name is Molly McCracken. I'm with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Manitoba and a proud member of the Climate Action Team Manitoba. So welcome everyone. We acknowledge we are gathered on ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory, and these lands are the heartland of the Métis people. And we acknowledge that our water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. We are here in 2023 to say we have 7 years to cut emissions in Manitoba in half in order to prevent climate catastrophe. This is a startling fact, but also one that can be positive as we have the knowledge, expertise, and know-how right here in Manitoba to do so. Plus, acting now with high inflation rates and high costs of oil and gas to transition off of fossil fuels will save us money and improve our quality of life here in Manitoba. So what is the Road to Resilience? It is a series of policy papers and a project. It's evidence-based research that documents how Manitobans can save money and boost our local economy by taking serious action to reduce climate pollution. And there are 3 volumes that we've released to date. Today we're releasing the 3rd. The first one is called The Road to Resilience Pathway, which has principles and strategy to feed, house, and transport ourselves here locally without fossil fuels. And this was launched in February 2021. The second one, The Road to Resilience Energy Solutions, talks about the energy needed to do so. That was launched last March 2022. And today we are launching the policy solutions, which the province of Manitoba can do to get us off of fossil fuels and a policy framework and financing here in Manitoba. And this policy solutions document is a unique partnership between environmental nonprofits and the business community about affordability. And we are honored to have local business owners and environmental groups here today who support the Road to Resilience and the policy solutions document we are launching. We're very proud to have endorsement of this document by Manitoba Business for Climate. I'd like to acknowledge some folks in the room here for our live stream. We have Neil Cunningham, who's from the province of Manitoba. We have Dudley Thompson, who's an architect. We have Mark Arby, who's a wind consultant. We have Ed Lorenz, who'll be speaking also from geothermal. We have Jim Nosted, who's a consultant with Bithnick CFAR Business Building Analytics in Winnipeg. And we also have some folks from the Electric Vehicle Association, along with our project partners, the Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition, the Green Action Centre, the Climate Change Connection, and also we're supported by the Wilderness Committee. So those are my opening remarks, and I'm very pleased and proud to introduce Kurt Hull, who is lead author and researcher on this project. And thank you so much for all your work you've done on this and everything. I'll pass over this mic to you.
Thanks, Molly, and thank you everyone who has turned up here today to join us on this really important day. There's been a lot of work that has gone into this, and hopefully you'll see that in the documents that we're releasing. Last month, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, released its latest report. They didn't mince words. The UN Secretary General stated, "The climate time bomb is ticking," as he implored industrialized nations such as Canada to achieve net zero emissions by 2040. So, how are we doing? Well, not so well. Manitoba is the only province, other than Alberta, now sending more greenhouse gas pollution into the atmosphere every year than we did in 2005. In Manitoba, almost 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from our burning of fossil fuels for heating our buildings and fueling our vehicles. And our provincial economy loses between $2 billion and $3 billion every year paying for those fossil fuel imports. As one contributor to our report observed, it's like there's one pipeline dumping fossil fuels here while another pipeline sucks our money away. Just imagine the difference we could make for local households and businesses if we kept those billions of dollars here in Manitoba by replacing fossil energy with cheaper, locally made, renewable energy. But what do we need to do? Is it possible to heat our buildings and fuel our vehicles electrically? In February of 2021, Manitoba's Climate Action Team released the Road to Resilience. That document laid out a pathway to a resilient, fossil fuel-free Manitoba. Immediately after the release of R2R, we started work on Road to Resilience energy solutions to figure out how much power and energy would be required to heat our buildings and fuel our vehicles electrically. Hydro published estimates of the power and energy requirements. Roughly speaking, those estimates call for about 200% more power and 100% more energy over the course of a year. We used that as our starting point for Road to Resilience energy solutions. That's a big challenge. We believe that our numbers in Road to Resilience energy solutions show that it can be done, and it can be done without experimental technologies, new dams, or nuclear. Road to Resilience energy solutions was released in March of last year. Today, we present Road to Resilience policy solutions. Policy solutions shows how the energy solutions can be implemented. This is the first of what will be 3 release events. Today's event focuses on coordination and finance. Coming soon, will be suggestions for buildings and then electrifying vehicle transportation. The consequences of failing to reduce greenhouse gases are scary, but the solutions are not. Our policy solutions report confirms we already have the technology, the resources, and most important of all, the people we need to bring transitioning off of fossil fuels. Many of those people are here in this room right now. And I thank each and every one of you for everything you have done so far, while also sharing your optimism that our best days are ahead of us. I'm delighted to see so many local business owners and environmental organizations working together to share a simple truth. Addressing climate change in Manitoba should be good for our economy and our pocketbooks. It has also been encouraging to see that most Manitobans now understand this. Recent polling indicates that a clear majority of Manitobans believe climate change is real and caused by human activity. And nearly all residents agree that more grants and rebates would help move the needle on carbon emissions. Today, we have provided you all with a document that recommends 11 policy and legislative actions that will help Manitobans move the needle a lot. I would draw your attention to the table. The booklets are here if you want to pick up a copy. Draw your attention to the table on page 17 of that document. These are the essential few actions that we and the other contributors believe that Manitoba government must take to provide the coordination and financing to enable us to heat our buildings and fuel our vehicles electrically. Make no mistake, there is a fundamentally important role for our provincial government to create economically beneficial climate action opportunities on a scale that matches the requirements of climate science. The current approach of a scattering of small incentives is not working. Manitobans are paying too much for fossil fuels at the pump and on their heating bills, as our emissions continue to make climate change worse. What is needed is a dramatic increase in incentives and investment in renewable energy infrastructure, backed up by new rules and regulations that accelerate the phase-out of fossil fuels from our economy. An approach which simultaneously protects the vulnerable, benefits those who take action, and makes sure our emissions decline every year from now on. We propose a coordinated effort that would focus the government and our crown corporations and businesses towards meeting this challenge. For inspiration, I would like to recommend Seth Klein's book, A Good War, Mobilizing Canada for the Climate Emergency. If people have doubts as to whether or not this can be done, they should look to the generations before us. In 1939, Canada's ship and plane and gun manufacturing capability was almost non-existent. But within 3 years, we were producing thousands of planes and tanks and hundreds of ships and millions of guns every year. They knew they had an emergency, and they reacted with courage and ingenuity. We are calling for some of that same courage and ingenuity, but this time, we aren't putting our efforts into a war of destruction. This time, it's construction. We want to use our courage and ingenuity to provide people with good, long-lasting jobs and toward making heating our buildings and moving goods and people more affordable. A really important part of our solution proposal is widespread implementation of district geothermal. In a minute, I will turn the floor over to world-renowned geothermal expert, Ed Lorenz. Ed will share with you a specific example of how this could be done, and let me share this closing thought with you. We must do this. We can do this, and we should do this, for both environmental and economic reasons. By taking serious action on climate change, we can keep billions of dollars here in our provincial economy and create significant savings for households and businesses alike. Even for those Manitobans on the fringes who aren't yet convinced climate change is real, they know all too well that their energy bills are real and will only get worse if nothing changes. Implementing our policy solutions report will benefit Manitobans across party lines and across the province now and for generations to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt. Kurt mentioned one thing about the need to reduce our use of fossil fuels, and this graphic kind of really demonstrates what can be done in our climate. Top one shows basically a typical electrically heated home, electric baseboards or electric furnace. The second house is heated with gas, which most of the houses in the city are. And together they would use about 10 kilowatts of peak demand. The electrically heated home would use it in winter. The gas house would use the 3 kilowatts for running the air conditioning in summertime. So the peak demand would be about 10 kilowatts, and it would use about 23,000 kilowatt hours annually between those two buildings. Cars, the vehicles are going to produce roughly 5 or 6 tons of CO2. The gas house, about 5 tons of CO2, for a total of about 16 tons annually. Second graphic, if you converted both of those homes to a ground source heat pump, they would draw about 2.5 kilowatts each, which is about the equivalent of running 2 hair dryers or a toaster and a hair dryer. And so they would draw peak demand about half of what we are using conventionally right now. And they would use about half of the total amount of energy, about 11,800, and produce 6 tons less CO2. Third one is that frees up enough energy to electrify the vehicles that we're going to have to start using not too many years from now. With the electric vehicles, with the both houses running electrically, we're still only using about 10 kilowatts, about the same we are right now. And we're using a little bit less total kilowatt hours annually, even though we are all electric on our homes and all electric on our vehicles. So this is very doable with the electrical infrastructure we have today, without having to build another dam for $10.8 billion. So this is possible, it's possible right now. So one of the things that has been hindering the uptake of geothermal systems in the cities is a lot of places don't have enough property, or the property's landscape, it gets expensive to build the ground heat exchanger that you need for most people to do this in the cities. Very common, much more commonly done in the country, where there's a bit more space. But and then people living in condos and apartments really don't have access to the ground to be able to heat and cool their homes that way. But they are all connected to a gas utility or to electric utility. Is there any reason that we can't build a geothermal utility to deliver that energy to each house? What it means is running one pipe down the street, and you can connect to it, take some heat from it, or dump some heat into it when you're heating or cooling. And you're using electricity to do that, about 1/4 as much as you would right now with electric heat. So as an example, did a bit of a study around the Jonathan Taves Community Center. They've got 2 ice rinks. Those 2 ice rinks have to get rid of about 3 to 4 million kilowatt hours worth of energy every year. Right now, that's just being dissipated into the atmosphere. It's blown away by the wind. We're not using it. We're not recovering it. That energy, if that was stored in the ground, and there's a lot of land around that area, It's stored in the ground, whether it's in vertical boreholes that might be 400 feet deep, or it might be drilled horizontally. There's lots of space there. But that energy, if it's stored in the ground, can be pulled out by the other buildings around it. There's a library, there's a community center itself, 60,000 square foot school, 80,000 square foot personal care home just down the road, plus another 110 houses. That's about the same amount of energy that those buildings would take from it. It's free energy. And right now we're wasting it. We can recycle that energy, use it, and use it again, and use it again. So this is stuff that is really possible. We can eliminate the use of fossil fuels, and it's going to benefit everybody. As Kurt said, right now we're shipping, how many billions of dollars to places that are producing natural gas or fossil fuels. We can keep that within the province, use our energy, use it a lot more efficiently. It would also make better use of wind power, would make better use of photovoltaics, because we're using all of that electricity more efficiently. So it's something that we can very, very easily do. And it's very doable. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you talk about how this would be paid for?
Oh, one of the suggestions in that page 17 of this document, if you want. But we've got copies, I think, of all three documents here in various places. Some over there, some over here. But here's the scenario. What we're talking about is primarily, I'll give you the whole story, okay, or in a nutshell at least. What we think is necessary is a climate emergency secretariat, an agency that will coordinate this whole effort, rather than the approach that's being taken currently, which is that you or I have to make funding applications for whatever money is available, and we got to invest and stuff like that. Instead, we're talking about a climate emergency secretariat that coordinates efforts across the province with the Crown corporations, with all government agencies, and with the business community. But the first step is to set the right targets, to make sure that we're targeting zero emissions in a reasonably short period of time. And then we're talking about redirecting the carbon tax. Instead of the carbon tax being levied by Ottawa and coming back to us as a rebate, what we suggest is that carbon tax revenue becomes a fund that is used for zero interest loans for the action that we're talking about here, for the deep energy retrofit of buildings, and for other aspects of making our buildings more efficient is the first step. But also taking a portion of that fund and continuing to rebate it to the lowest income households, so that folks that really depend on those checks now continue to receive them. And then there's a couple of key changes to Crown corporations or agencies, and that is to redirect Efficiency Manitoba to focus on greenhouse gas emission reduction through the efficient use of electricity, and the creation of, as Ed mentioned, a geothermal utility to plan and implement geothermal province-wide, coordinated by that climate emergency secretariat, working with Efficiency Manitoba and the energy auditors that are just recently been trained to really implement this province-wide. That in a nutshell is what we're proposing here with the policy solutions, coordination and finance.
Thanks to those
I
who
wouldn't
just
mind
joined
adding a
us.
little
Yeah,
bit to that.
sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Right now, the utilities are amortizing the cost of putting in the gas pipelines. Electric grid is over probably 75 to 100 years. And that's what makes it possible for them to make money by building that expensive infrastructure. If the same thing was applied to a geothermal utility, run a pipe down the street, no different than a gas line, that could be done the same way. Amortize it over a long period of time, and it makes it a lot more economically feasible. I read an interesting article a couple of weeks ago. Province of Ontario, to expand the gas pipelines to a bunch of different communities, they're subsidizing the cost of running a gas pipeline to the number of communities. Any thoughts on how much they're subsidizing it for a single customer? Close to $60,000 per customer. They're amortizing it over a long period of time, so they could do that. But that seems kind of silly to me. You can put a ground source system in for less money than that. So it's pretty, numbers are pretty astounding. Yeah.
Thank you. I recognize the folks who just joined us, and John Gerard, thank you so much for being here. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Sure. I know all of us who have been making submissions to you our own opinions on this. You're becoming the hub of the wheel, so to speak. In terms of policy, what are you noticing most organizations are saying to you, and individuals and businesses, is the biggest policy hurdle we have to overcome?
Well, in my mind, that we've got to move the solution away from the onus being on individuals towards it being this is a systemic problem, and it requires a systemic solution. And the only way that systemic solution can be implemented is by a coordinated effort. That's why this document is called Coordination and Finance. It's got to be financed in a way that's affordable for people, rather than individuals having to take doing all the math themselves. We're talking about taking a coordinated approach to this, led by the provincial government primarily. Yes.
Can I make a comment on buildings and what needs to happen in buildings?
Go ahead and stand up, Jim. Give us your wisdom.
Hi, my name is Jim Nostad. When we're talking about buildings, everybody thinks this is going to cost us a whole pile more money. And if you're talking about new construction of new buildings, you're going to spend, to get a high performance passive house building, about 5 to 8% more in capital cost. However, if you built $1 million building, you will save $1 million in life cycle costs after the construction is complete. And your savings will exceed expenses within 5-6 years. That's a pretty good deal. And so people are thinking that this costs money. In fact, it saves them money. Okay, so that's new buildings, but let's talk about existing buildings, because they're the biggest chunk here at the end of the day. So existing buildings are a little more difficult, because now you have to fix the buildings that were never built right to begin with. And it takes more time and more effort, and it costs more money. But the savings are the same. If you got a $1 million building, you'll save $1 million in life cycle costs. The time to recover, or the time for your savings to exceed expenses, is probably within 10, 15. In some cases where the building's in bad shape and you've got to fix a lot of maintenance items, it can be 15 or more years. But the savings are still there. It just takes longer for them to happen. And we need to have those savings, because these buildings are using almost zero greenhouse gas emissions, or producing zero greenhouse gas emissions at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
And if you do it through Jim's company, you get a much more comfortable home.
And a comfortable home, precisely. Yeah, that's something that people don't even take into account, is that you can walk around in your sock feet when it's 30 below and not have cold feet.
There's an interesting comment that was made about not needing to create a new dam. I wonder if you can talk about that, because I'm not sure people that fully resonates.
Yeah. Well,
hydroelectricity is our dominant source of electricity.
it is. And when with the Road Resilience Energy Solutions, when we did put the numbers together, and that was what differentiated it from the Road Resilience. The first document is primarily a narrative, tells us the story. Road Resilience Energy Solutions looked at can we meet that challenge that hydro put, that they estimated that 200% more power and 100% more energy over the course of the year. Is it possible? And we opened up our minds. We said, okay, if we need a new dam, maybe, whatever, we need nuclear, but our analysis said no. If we focus on energy demand reduction, energy efficiency, primarily through geothermal, that's the biggest win right there. That the numbers would work. We can make those numbers work to provide, to meet the challenge. And that was really heartening, because we sure as heck don't want to go that route to try to, make another dam, or the risks of nuclear. Yes?
So do you think we'll finally impress upon in this document the fact that we need all aspects, not just, we need good buildings, we need good policy, we need good education to the public even on how to create the circle here. Do you think that we're finally going to be able to take this to the provincial government and abroad and be able to implement an idea?
Well, that's a great question and a central suggestion that's in the document. Item number 2 is that the creation of that Climate Emergency Secretariat and the name of the document is Coordination and Finance. And there's no single magic bullet, but there are some really important levers and mechanisms that need to be put into play here, and that need to be done in a coordinated way, just as you're suggesting. That solar and wind and geothermal and energy efficiency and high performance buildings, electrification of vehicle transportation, all have to be incorporated and managed as a system. Ideally, that's the way it's going to be successful. Just as Ed was saying, that geothermal, if you or I try to put it in our gardens, we don't achieve the same level of efficiency as we would if it was done on a district system, where you can have heating dominant buildings and cooling dominant buildings, all in the same system, sharing their various aspects.
One thing I might add there, it is kind of encouraging in some ways. When I first got into designing geothermal systems, my goal was to put the gas companies out of business, period. And it's actually starting to happen. Enbridge Gas, which is a big gas distribution company in Ontario, and they have gas pipelines all over the place. They've started recently a company called Enbridge Sustain. Their goal is to install geothermal systems as a utility, exactly like Kurt was talking about. So it is doable. It is absolutely being done. And we're doing district system designs in various places. Did a district system design for the city of Missoula, Montana recently. And it's very doable. It's quite possible to do it, cost effective. The economics works. And we can meet those climate change challenges with existing infrastructure.
But we also have another question here, so yeah, one more question and then we'll move to.
Okay, I'm just wondering if you can expand a bit on like the mandate of Efficiency Manitoba, like you're asking for recommending a change. So what is it now versus what you want it to be? Could you expand on that?
Sure. Currently, Efficiency Manitoba is mandated by legislation. There's a bill, Efficiency Manitoba bill, apparently, that says that this Crown Corporation must reduce natural gas usage by 1.5% per year and electrical usage by 0.75% a year. And all of their action is focused on that. But because that's their focus, it doesn't allow them to encourage an increased use of electricity efficiently for things like the geothermal. Instead, they have to sort of balance those two requirements, the 1.5% and the 0.75% mandates that they have. And they can't encourage new electrification of vehicles because it would increase the electrical demand, geothermal would increase electrical demand, but both of those will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So therefore, if their focus was on greenhouse gas emission reduction through the efficient use of electricity in Manitoba, then they would be allowed to move into those spheres. There's a second aspect of our recommendation, which gives them access to some of that carbon tax revenue. Because another reason for that narrow focus is because of the way that they're financed. Efficiency Manitoba receives almost all of their funding from your hydro bill. There's a certain amount of levy that comes from your hydro bill, and that's what sort of causes them to be limited to helping those customers that are contributing to reducing their electrical and natural gas demand. But if their revenues at least a portion of it came from the carbon tax, then it would make ethical sense that their efforts would be to help people get away from their need to contribute to that tax.
And Kurt, if I could take a second to just point out, that wasn't an oversight on the part of the government either. Some folks may not be aware, because we told the government that was going to be a problem right from the very beginning, before they even brought the act in. So they were aware of this when they set it up.
We're just going to move forward here, Robert.
So, my question to John Gerard is currently, of course, no one is allowed to sell power in Manitoba, and we're changing that currently in the language with Bill 36, C36. Do you foresee, like he was talking about, that some geothermal companies now sell their energy? Is that possible in Manitoba? Is that a possible future for Manitoba, to have multiple power source companies, maybe even a community solar selling situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, very possible where there's access power equivalent coming from whether it comes from wind or geothermal in other locations that sort of use this approach.
So you believe that Manitoba is soon to see over the next few years other types of power being offered instead of just Manitoba hydro?
Yeah, well, I think that what's being proposed here is a geothermal utility, right?
Correct, but there also be other energy sources as well.
Well, I think the question that you're trying to look at, right? And I don't think that we necessarily need to get into the governance issues of whether you need a solar power utility or so on. But the fundamental issue that you're trying to make is, can we, when we generate electricity from solar and wind or can we have a system that will be able to, in essence, reverse what's happening now, so that can go back into the system instead of being wasted. There are some circumstances where that's happening in Manitoba, but you can happen in much broader way.
Yeah, Kurt, do you have any comment on that at all? Or?
Well, we're focused primarily on the geothermal utility, but there is a need for, as I said earlier, that this is a multifaceted solution requiring input from wind, solar, geothermal, energy efficiency, building energy efficiency, etc. However that's implemented.
John?
Yeah, I have a question for you. One of your points is expanding the scope of the carbon tax to include all sources of climate emissions.
That would be a longer term objective. That's why it's sort of farther down on the list there. But that's where it makes sense to.
How would you envision it happening? What would you be taxing?
Well, there's various. I don't want to specifically name sources that are excluded right now until we've got alternatives, and that's what because the aspects related to energy fossil fuel burning, we have very clear proposals for alternatives. That's why we're focused on that. But we should be looking at the other sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the province as that need to be reduced as well.
I think one area to mention here would be the emission data was just released, and you can look to see where it has gone up. Landfills, for example, have increased.
And there's a significant amount of emissions from fossil fuel-based fertilizers.
And in some of those situations, there would be alternatives such as curbside compost pickup, which we're not specifically talking about in this document. This is more focused on some other stuff, but that would be kind of another example to consider.
Fossil fuel-based fertilizers, but an alternative needs to be put into place first. And we are currently working on a research project related to agriculture, focused on how do we produce the crops that we do now without fossil fuel-based fertilizer in a way that's profitable for the producer. And we've been putting numbers together with the, we'll release that later with all of the details, but that would be, once we've got that system, that suggested system to be put forward, then we would consider including that source of greenhouse gas emissions in the carbon tax levy. But we're not going there yet until we've got the alternative analysis that's been completed, so we can say this is an alternative. We're not just going to say this is going to cost you more to make food. Instead, we'll say this is an alternative that would still make the producers profitable.
Are there currently any opportunities to act pushing these things forward?
Well, there's one right now, which is the question before the province right now as to what level or what tier of the 2020 building code is going to be adopted. That's a significant opportunity right there, because we're already, it's in legislation that we are going to adopt the 2020 code, which is going to make our new buildings more efficient. But the question is which tier, which level of efficiency is going to be mandated. And so there's an opportunity to adopt the highest tier that industry can deliver on, and then come up with a plan for increasing that tier, because the federal government's already indicated that by 2030, the building code will be net zero. And so our industry has to move in that direction as quickly as possible. It's just a matter of, you don't wait until the last minute in order to try to jump. Instead, let's start right now and get our expertise going and our efficiencies and economies of scale going right now. Yes, Jim? So
In this code tier business, right now people are saying we're going to increment our way to net zero. And in fact, if you go straight to net zero today, you will save more money than you did if you go this incremental approach. So just go to net zero today on all new construction. But there's this perception out there, particularly by developers and homeowners, oh, this is going to cost me more money, I can't do this. That's not the case. In fact, they will save money, and a very substantial amount of money. And I talked about before, $1 million building, $1 million in savings. So why are we going this tier thing? Because of this perception that we can't afford to do it. And it's a bad perception. And so we should just jump right to the net zero, but we've got to show people, we've got to educate them that that's the case, that those savings really are there.
Great. Well, we're getting close to our time here. Any other questions or comments?
Just kudos to the committee for taking a solutions-based approach to this. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Help yourself to the donuts and coffee before you leave.
Share the news, right?
Share
To
the
your
news.
elected
There's copies
representatives
here.
about this. No.